The first warning came as static screaming across a broken Vox channel, half a second before the sky itself split apart. Bolt of fire tore through the smoke-choked nave of the ruined cathedral, each detonation flashing like dying stars against walls blackened by centuries of war. Space Marines advanced in disciplined formation, boots crunching over shattered stone and scattered bones. Their armor scarred, their heraldry burned almost beyond recognition. Every target they fired upon should have been dead already, yet the shapes in the darkness kept moving, crawling forward through fire and shrapnel as if pain had been forgotten by the universe itself. A thunderous impact shook the structure from its foundations. The ceiling collapsed in a storm of debris, crushing friend and foe alike. And for a moment the battlefield vanished beneath a choking cloud of dust. Inside it, warning runes flared red across helmet lenses. Auspex readings made no sense. Enemy signatures flickered, vanished, then reappeared behind Imperial lines. One squad was erased in seconds, their death screams cutting off mid-syllable, replaced by a sound that did not belong to any known throat. It was a low, reverberating chant, distorted yet unmistakably human. The Space Marines pushed forward regardless. They always did. Chainswords roared to life, carving through shadows that bled like men but died like nothing the Imperium had ever catalogued. One warrior was dragged screaming into the darkness, his gauntlet scraping across stone as he fired blindly. The muzzle flashes illuminating faces that mirrored his own helmeted silhouette, identical, wrong another. Marine froze as his autosenses identified the enemy's armor markings. Corrupted but familiar, sigils that should only exist in sealed archives and erased campaign logs. His hesitation lasted less than a heartbeat. It was enough. The ground buckled as something vast moved beneath the cathedral floor. Cracks raced across the stone like veins, glowing briefly with a sickly, unnatural light. A dreadnought advanced to meet it, assault cannon roaring, only to be torn apart by forces that ignored ceramite and adamantium alike. Its death scream echoed through the vaults, machine and warrior crying as one. Above it all, the chanting grew louder, resolving into words spoken in High Gothic, twisted by voices that spoke with certainty. Not madness. Orders barked across the Vox, clipped and absolute, but fear crept in any way. Not the fear of death, the fear of recognition. These enemies fought with Imperial discipline. They anticipated flanking maneuvers before they happened. They knew the litany codes. They answered challenges meant only for loyal sons of terror. One Marine, his armor split and sparking, fell to one knee as his blade shattered against an unseen barrier. Through the smoke, he saw a figure step forward, haloed by fire, wearing a symbol outlawed 10,000 years ago. As blood pooled around him and the battle roared on, the dying warrior keyed his Vox for the final time. His voice was calm, almost reverent, as if naming a truth long denied. He spoke a single forbidden phrase, one purged from every record, one that carried the weight of execution merely for being remembered. The channel went dead immediately, cut by an unseen hand, and for a heartbeat the battlefield fell silent. In that silence, a truth hung heavy and undeniable. This enemy was never meant to exist. Long before the first bolter was raised in that ruined cathedral, long before the forbidden phrase was spoken over a dying Vox channel, the truth had already been sealed behind layers of silence thicker than any fortress wall. The Imperium of Man was built not only on conquest and faith, but on omission. Entire centuries were edited into neat obedience, campaigns reduced to footnotes, victories recorded while their costs were erased, in the deepest vaults of terror, beneath miles of stone and prayer. There existed archives that no living soul was permitted to open without authorization so absolute it bordered on myth. These records did not speak of glory. They spoke of necessity, of decisions made when the Emperor himself judged that truth was more dangerous than any enemy. The decree had no name, only a designation stripped of meaning to anyone who glimpsed it by accident. Servitors processed it without comprehension, their memories wiped between tasks, their organic components replaced once degradation risked curiosity. Even the High Lords knew only fragments, references nested inside references, warnings without explanations. It was understood that this order was issued at the height of Imperial expansion, when the Great Crusade burned brightest and the Imperium still believed itself unstoppable. Compliance fleets advanced into the dark with absolute confidence, and for a time, nothing seemed beyond the Emperor's reach. That was when the anomaly was first encountered, not as a threat, but as a deviation in Imperial force that returned from the void, carrying victories that could not be verified and losses that did not match reality. At first, it was assumed to be simple error. Warp interference distorted reports constantly, and commanders learned to read between corrupted data streams. But patterns emerged. Entire regiments reassigned without record. Expeditionary fleets that arrived months ahead of schedule. Their crews aged beyond expectation, their eyes hollow with something unspoken. Astropaths attached to these forces died screaming during transmission, their final visions sealed by the Sigillite himself. When questioned, surviving officers repeated the same phrase again and again, as if drilled into them. Compliance achieved, resistance eliminated, losses acceptable. No further details followed. No medals were awarded. No remembrances were permitted. The Emperor noticed. Of course he did. Nothing of this scale moved without his awareness, but for the first time, he did not act openly. Instead, he ordered containment. A circle of trusted agents was formed, drawn from those who understood obedience without understanding, men and women who would carry out annihilation without asking what was being annihilated. The Legiones Astartes were not informed, not fully. Select chapters received fragmentary orders, framed as routine purgation of anomalous threats. Others were deliberately kept away, their fleets diverted by false priorities and fabricated emergencies. It was not that the Emperor feared dissent. It was that knowledge itself had become a contagion. What had been found beyond the Imperium's frontier was not an empire, nor a xenos civilization, nor a warp-spawned horror. It was something that mirrored humanity too closely, something that reflected Imperial doctrine with a precision that bordered on reverence. Its forces fought in disciplined formations. Its commanders spoke of unity, of destiny, of a future shaped by order rather than faith. They claimed lineage, not in blood, but in purpose. To confront them was to confront a version of the Imperium that had taken a single doctrinal step too far and refused to turn back. The Emperor understood immediately what that meant. This was not a foe that could be defeated by force alone. This was a truth that could unravel everything the Imperium believed about itself. The first war against this hidden enemy was swift and absolute, at least on the surface. Systems went dark overnight. Worlds were quarantined and then declared lost to warp storms that never existed. Loyal forces withdrew under sealed orders, leaving behind nothing but scorched atmospheres and drifting wreckage. Every engagement was recorded, then buried. Every survivor was interrogated, then altered. Some were granted the mercy of death. Others were mind-wiped, their service reassigned, their identities rewritten. A few were kept, watched endlessly, living reminders of what could not be allowed to happen again. When the final report was delivered, it was not written in the language of victory. It was a warning. The anomaly had been suppressed, not destroyed. Its core truth remained intact. Preserved by methods the Imperium could not fully comprehend without embracing the very thing it sought to erase. The Emperor's response was decisive and cold. He ordered the truth entombed, its name stricken from all records, its symbols outlawed under pain of execution. He decreed that if it ever surfaced again, it would be met not with debate or study, but with immediate and total eradication. No questions, no witnesses. Time did what time always does. Centuries passed, then millennia. The Great Crusade ended in fire and betrayal, and the Imperium that emerged from the ashes was no longer capable of questioning its own foundations. The sealed archives remained sealed, guarded by institutions that no longer remembered why they existed, only that they must never fail. Occasionally, an inquisitor would stumble too close, chasing a thread that led into nothingness. Those inquisitors vanished, officially reassigned, quietly executed. The system worked because it had to, yet silence is never permanent. Across the Imperium, small inconsistencies began to surface. Battle doctrines encountered in enemy hands, fragmentary transmissions echoing obsolete litanies, symbols appearing in places no Imperial force had officially visited. Each incident was isolated, dismissed, buried, but together they formed the outline of a shape the Imperium had sworn never to see again. Deep within the vaults of terror, ancient warning sigils flickered to life for the first time in 10,000 years. Automated systems initiated protocols older than most stars the Imperium now claimed. Somewhere, a sealed chamber unlocked itself by the Emperor's long-dead command. The truth had not died. It had waited. When the war was finally acknowledged, it was not announced to the Imperium as a crusade or a defense, but as a correction. Orders were issued through channels that bypassed normal command hierarchies, sealed with sigils that predated the Codex Astartes and overrode all appeals. Fleets were rerouted mid-translation, their navigators given coordinates without context, their astropaths sworn to silence on pain of soul-binding. Entire sectors were placed under temporary isolation, their distress calls muted, their existence reduced to static on Imperial charts. To the wider Imperium, nothing happened. To those who were sent, everything did. The first battles were small, almost surgical, rapid insertions into systems that should have been empty, strikes against installations that did not appear on any official map. What the Space Marines found defied expectation. Fortress worlds built according to Imperial standards, manufactoria humming with familiar rhythms, cities laid out in patterns taught by Imperial architects. Yet there were no Aquilas, no icons of the Emperor, no chapels ringing with prayer. Instead, banners bore simplified sigils of unity and order, stripped of divinity, stripped of reverence. The enemy fought with bolters calibrated to Imperial specifications, their armor modified but unmistakably derived from Astartes' design. They did not chant to the dark gods. They did not scream in madness. They advanced in silence, efficient and unafraid. As engagements escalated, it became clear that this was not a single world or an isolated rebellion. It was a network spread across multiple systems, each supporting the others with logistical precision that rivaled the Imperium itself. Supply lines were hidden in plain sight, masked as derelict trade routes and abandoned colonies. When Imperial forces attempted decapitation strikes, they found no central command, no figurehead to destroy. Leadership was distributed, redundant, resilient. Every victory felt incomplete, every annihilated stronghold replaced by another that rose elsewhere with unsettling speed. Worse still was the enemy's understanding of Imperial doctrine. Ambushes anticipated standard flanking maneuvers. Defensive lines adjusted moments before orbital bombardment, as if forewarned. Vox codes, thought obsolete, were used to jam communications at critical moments, sowing confusion without ever revealing their source. In one engagement, an Imperial captain issued a rallying cry only to hear it echoed back at him from the opposing line. Spoken in perfect cadence, the words twisted just enough to turn faith into mockery. That captain died moments later, struck down by a blade forged to the same pattern as his own. Asterisk, the scale of the war expanded rapidly. What began as isolated purges became full-system engagements. Titans were deployed, their godingents striding across continents only to be met by weapons that should not have existed outside Martian forges. Skittery cohorts fell to cybernetic soldiers whose augmetics mirrored Mechanicus designs but lacked any sign of machine worship. Forge worlds reported data theft so precise it bordered on reverence, sacred schematics extracted without triggering alarms, as if the intruders knew exactly which prayers to bypass. The Mechanicus denied everything, even as their own priests began disappearing into the void. At the height of the conflict, orders were issued that shattered long-held assumptions. Loyal chapters were commanded to engage other loyal chapters without explanation. Their communications cut to prevent hesitation. The official justification spoke of contamination, of compromised gene seed, of threats too subtle to name. Space Marines who had fought side by side for centuries turned their weapons on one another under sealed writs, trusting that the emperors will justify all acts. Entire companies were wiped out in brutal, silent clashes that never entered the annals of Imperial history. The enemy watched and learned, adapting even faster. The most devastating battles were fought in silence. Systems would go dark without warning, their stars still burning, but their worlds suddenly unreachable. When Imperial forces arrived months or years later, they found nothing but drifting debris and scorched planets, their populations gone, their infrastructures dismantled with methodical care. No mass graves, no ritual markings, just absence. The enemy did not conquer for territory. They erased, reshaped, and moved on, leaving behind voids the Imperium could not easily fill. Each loss weakened the fabric of Imperial control, even as the truth was buried deeper. Reports from the front grew increasingly fragmented. Commanders described an enemy that adapted not only tactically, but ideologically. They spoke of soldiers who fought without fear of damnation, who did not pray for salvation or curse the warp. They believed utterly in their cause, a cause described in intercepted transmissions as the inevitable evolution of humanity. One captured officer, interrogated under extreme sanction, claimed that the Imperium was clinging to a lie, that the Emperor had once seen the same future they now pursued and had turned away in fear. The interrogation record ends abruptly, sealed under authority that allowed no review. It was during this phase of the war that the Emperor issued his most controversial command. A weapon was authorized that violated principles he himself had enforced since the dawn of the Imperium. Entire regions of space were subjected to annihilation protocols. their warp routes destabilized, their stars extinguished through means known only to the Emperor and a handful of his closest allies. The enemy was caught within these zones, but so were millions of loyal Imperial citizens. The calculus was brutal and deliberate. Survival of the Imperium outweighed all other considerations. The war ended not with a decisive victory, but with exhaustion. The enemy's networks collapsed under relentless pressure, their numbers dwindling, their movements slowing. Yet no final battle marked their defeat. No homeworld burned as a warning. Instead, the last confirmed engagements faded into skirmishes, then into rumors, then into nothing at all. The Imperium declared the threat neutralized and immediately began the work of erasing the war itself. Fleets were reassigned. Records were purged. Veterans were silenced, their memories altered, or their lives quietly ended. Even among the highest ranks, understanding was replaced with obedience. In private, those who had overseen the conflict understood the truth. The enemy had not been destroyed. They had been scattered, driven into hiding, forced to abandon open warfare. The methods that had nearly undone the Imperium still existed, preserved in minds and systems beyond Imperial reach. The war had been won only in the sense that it had been survived, and survival, as the Emperor knew better than anyone, was never the same as victory. The truth, when it finally surfaced within the highest circles of Imperial command, did not arrive as revelation, but as inevitability. Patterns that had been dismissed as coincidence aligned too cleanly to ignore. Genetic analysis of recovered armor fragments revealed markers that should not have existed outside sanctioned gene seed vaults. Tactical doctrines employed by the enemy traced back to pre-heresy philosophies, refined rather than corrupted. This was not imitation. It was inheritance. The enemy had not stolen Imperial knowledge. They had grown from it, shaped by the same foundational principles that had once driven the Great Crusade forward with ruthless clarity at the heart of the matter. Lay a sin the Imperium could never publicly acknowledge. Ambition unchecked by faith. In the earliest days of expansion, before dogma hardened into law, the Emperor had sanctioned experimental doctrines meant to test humanity's potential beyond the limits of superstition and dependence on divinity. Certain expeditionary forces were granted unprecedented autonomy. They were encouraged to adapt, to innovate, to pursue unity through reason rather than worship. Their success was undeniable. Compliance was swift. Resistance collapsed not through terror, but through inevitability. Worlds joined because they saw no alternative future worth choosing. But autonomy breeds divergence. Cut off from terror by distance and time, these forces refined the Emperor's early vision without his later restraints. They removed ritual where it slowed efficiency. They've replaced faith with certainty. The Emperor, observing the trajectory of their development, recognized the danger too late. Humanity shaped solely by logic would not kneel. It would not accept eternal guidance. It would question the necessity of an immortal ruler who claimed absolute authority. To preserve the Imperium, that future had to be denied. This was the corruption that could not be named. Not the madness of chaos, not the seduction of the warp, but a purity of purpose so complete it threatened the very concept of the Imperium. Space Marines who encountered this truth firsthand felt something far more destabilizing than fear. They felt doubt. The enemy did not curse them, did not blaspheme. Instead, they spoke calmly, articulating arguments that struck too close to thoughts buried deep within every Astartes mind. They spoke of duty without worship, of unity without sacrifice, of humanity ruling itself without divine intermediaries. For warriors conditioned to absolute loyalty, the effect was corrosive. Incidents of hesitation increased. Bolters lowered for half a second too long. Orders questioned, not aloud, but in silence. Chaplains reported an uptick in internal disciplinary rituals, as if the warriors sensed something wrong within themselves and sought to scour it away through pain and devotion. In several recorded engagements, Imperial forces withdrew despite tactical superiority, unable to reconcile their training with what they were facing. The enemy exploited this mercilessly, withdrawing just as doubt peaked, ensuring the seed remained. One Primarch, whose name no longer exists in any sanctioned record, recognized the full scope of the crisis. He had been present during the early days of the Crusade, had witnessed the shift from vision to dogma, from unity to worship. To him, the enemy represented a path the Emperor himself had once walked before abandoning it. When the final order was issued, mandating complete eradication through methods that would annihilate loyal and enemy alike, this Primarch refused. Not in open rebellion, but in quiet defiance. He argued that destroying this truth would only ensure its return in a more dangerous form, that humanity could not be saved through lies forever. The response was swift and absolute. The Primarch was declared compromised, his genetic legacy tainted by ideological deviation. His legion was ordered to stand down pending evaluation. When elements within the legion resisted, believing their Primarch acted in the Imperium's best interest, the response escalated to annihilation. Loyal chapters were unleashed against them with sealed orders and no explanations. What followed was not war, but slaughter conducted in total secrecy. Brothers slew brothers, gene seed was destroyed, battle honors erased. By the time it ended, an entire bloodline had been reduced to absence. The aftermath was meticulous. Survivors were mind-wiped and reassigned, their identities rewritten down to muscle memory. Records of the Primarch's existence were expunged so thoroughly that even gaps were smoothed over. Histories rewritten to suggest fewer legions had ever existed. Monuments were dismantled, statues ground into dust. Their materials repurposed elsewhere so nothing remained that could invite questions. Those who had overseen the purge carried the weight of it in silence, knowing that obedience had preserved the Imperium at the cost of something essential. Yet corruption does not require chaos to persist. The enemy, scattered and diminished, carried with them the memory of what had been done. They understood now that the Imperium would never tolerate their existence openly. They adapted accordingly, embedding themselves within the void, within forgotten systems, within the blind spots of Imperial bureaucracy. They became patient. They observed as the Imperium decayed under the weight of its own contradictions, as faith replaced reason entirely, as survival supplanted progress. In time, they no longer needed to fight openly. The Imperium was weakening itself. Within the Imperium, the consequences were equally profound. Institutions designed to suppress this truth grew increasingly autonomous, their authority unchecked by transparency or accountability. The Inquisition expanded its mandate, convinced that any deviation, however minor, could lead back to the same abyss. Innovation became heresy. Questioning doctrine became treason. Humanity endured, but it did not advance. The lie held, but it bled constantly, requiring ever greater sacrifice to maintain deep within sealed vaults. Remnants of the original doctrine remained, locked away by the Emperor's command. Automated systems monitored them endlessly, awaiting conditions that might require their release or destruction. No human mind was trusted with full access. Even the Emperor, entombed upon the golden throne, could no longer intervene directly. The Imperium carried on, unaware that its greatest threat was not chaos at its gates, but a future it had once chosen and then denied. The corruption had never been external. It had always been internal, rooted in the Imperium's origin and sustained by fear of what humanity might become without chains. And far from terror, in the darkness between stars, that truth endured, untainted by worship or madness, waiting for the moment when the Imperium's grip would finally falter. The return began without ceremony, without the thunder of prophecy or the flare of apocalyptic omen. It began, as all truly catastrophic events do in the Imperium, as an anomaly buried beneath layers of routine failure. A single system went silent along a minor trade route, its astropathic choir extinguished mid. The loss was logged, attributed to warp instability, and deprioritized in favor of more immediate crises. Within weeks, 3 more systems followed, their final transmissions fragmented but disturbingly precise. Reporting, disciplined forces, impossible coordination, and enemies who issued evacuation orders before opening fire. By the time the pattern was recognized, the lie that had sustained the Imperium for 10,000 years had already begun to unravel. When Imperial forces finally arrived in strength, they found battlefields that echoed the past too closely to be coincidence. Defensive lines mirrored ancient compliance strategies. Kill zones were established exactly where Imperial tacticians would have chosen them. In several engagements, Space Marine captains found their own tactical predictions rendered useless, countered before they were fully formed. The enemy did not rush. They did not overextend. They fought as if time itself favored them, as if survival, not victory, was their true objective. And in that patience, the Imperium recognized something far more dangerous than aggression. Within the sealed archives of terror, ancient protocols completed their cycles. Warning systems activated, comparing present data with patterns last observed during the Forgotten War. The match was undeniable. Authorization codes, long thought symbolic, unlocked vaults that had not been opened since the Emperor still walked among men. The truth, once buried to preserve the Imperium, was now deemed necessary for its survival. Select individuals were briefed, their reactions carefully monitored. Some accepted the revelation with cold pragmatism. Others broke under its weight, realizing that everything they had defended rested on deliberate omission. A few attempted to dissent. None were permitted to leave. The Emperor's final contingency was enacted not as salvation, but as repetition. Orders were issued to contain, isolate, and annihilate. Once again, sectors were condemned without explanation. Once again, loyal forces were sacrificed to deny the enemy resources and momentum. The difference this time lay in awareness. Those who fought now understood, at least in fragments, what they were truly facing. They were not defending the Imperium from an external invader. They were suppressing a consequence. Every bolter round fired, every world burned, reinforced the same cycle that had led to this moment. On the battlefield where the story had begun, the truth came full circle. The enemy commander emerged from the smoke, his armor bearing no sigils of chaos, no marks of madness. His voice, carried across open vox channels, was calm, almost weary. He did not demand surrender. He did not preach. He spoke only of inevitability, of a future delayed but not denied. He named the lie without naming it, describing an Imperium that endured not through righteousness, but through fear of change. His words were cut short by orbital fire, his form erased in a storm of annihilation. Yet even as his body vanished, the damage was done. The transmission had been heard. The battle ended as most Imperial victories do, with silence and smoke and the absence of anything resembling triumph. The enemy forces withdrew, melting back into the void with deliberate precision. The Imperium held the field, but gained nothing from it. Casualty reports were sealed. Survivors were screened, interrogated, and in some cases eliminated for signs of contamination that could not be clearly defined. The cathedral lay in ruins, its stones soaked with blood that would never be commemorated. Officially, the engagement was recorded as a successful suppression of a heretical incursion. Unofficially, it was understood as a warning. In the aftermath, the Imperium tightened its grip. Censorship intensified. Doctrinal enforcement grew harsher. Entire schools of thought within the Mechanicus were outlawed overnight. Chapters with unusually high rates of independent command were reassigned or broken apart. The Inquisition expanded its reach, convinced that the only way to prevent the truth from spreading was to strangle the Imperium itself into immobility. Humanity endured, but the cost of endurance increased with every passing year. Somewhere, deep within the machinery of the Golden Throne, the Emperor remained silent. Whether he approved of the cycle repeating itself, or whether he was now powerless to prevent it, no one could say. His will, once clear and decisive, had been interpreted, fractured, and weaponized by institutions that no longer remembered his original vision. The lie still held, but only just, stretched thin across a decaying empire that could no longer afford to question itself. Far from terror, beyond the reach of most Imperial charts, remnants of the enemy observed and waited. They had learned from the past. They no longer sought to replace the Imperium outright. They understood now that collapse would come from within. Their existence alone forced the Imperium to remain static, to consume itself in the effort to suppress alternatives. In time, they believed, humanity would reach a breaking point where survival through stagnation would no longer be possible. When that moment came, the truth would not need to fight. It would simply be there. The Imperium told itself that it had won again, that the threat had been contained, that the lie remained intact. But lies require constant reinforcement, and the Imperium was running out of strength to maintain them. In forgotten systems and sealed archives, in half-remembered doctrines and forbidden phrases, the truth endured, patient and unyielding. It did not rage against the darkness. It waited for it to collapse under its own weight. The last survivor did not know how long he had been alone. Time had lost its meaning somewhere between the collapse of the cathedral vault and the moment the guns finally fell silent. His armor was fractured, its systems flickering between failure states, auto-repair routines, long exhausted. Blood pooled inside the suit where the seals had ruptured, warm and unmistakably his own. Around him lay the remnants of the battle, bodies reduced to shapes beneath ash and stone, banners torn apart by fire, symbols rendered meaningless by destruction. Victory had been declared somewhere far above him, but down here there was only aftermath and the quiet horror of understanding. With shaking gauntlets, he activated his Vox recorder. Not a broadcast, not a plea for extraction, but a personal log, the kind meant to die with its bearer. His voice was steady despite the pain, disciplined by centuries of training. Yet beneath it lay something unfamiliar. Doubt. He spoke of the enemy without naming them, of how they fought like reflections, of how their words had cut deeper than their weapons. He admitted what no space marine was ever meant to admit, that for a moment he had understood them. Not agreed, not accepted, but understood. And that understanding had terrified him more than any demon or xenos ever could. He described the war as it truly was, stripped of sanctioned language and official lies. He spoke of orders that made no sense until it was too late, of brothers turned against brothers under seals that allowed no question. He spoke of a truth buried so deep that even acknowledging its outline felt like treason. His breathing grew heavier as he spoke, each word costing him strength he no longer had to spare. Still, he continued, driven by the certainty that silence was the final enemy, that if no one spoke, then nothing had ever happened. The moment he finished, the signal left his armor and was caught instantly by listening systems that had been waiting long before he was born. The message did not travel far. It was intercepted, isolated, and sealed within microseconds, flagged by protocols older than the chapter that had raised him. On Terra, deep within chambers that never saw light, the recording was reviewed by eyes that showed no reaction. Authorization was granted. The file was locked behind sigils that permitted no future access. The survivor's gene seed was marked for destruction. His name was removed from all records before his body had even gone cold. The survivor died where he knelt, alone among the ruins, believing he had failed. He never knew that his message had been preserved, not to be heard, but to be buried alongside every other truth that threatened the Imperium's fragile cohesion. Official reports would describe the battle as a necessary purge, the losses as acceptable, the outcome as victory. The wider Imperium would never know how close it had come to confronting itself. In the end, nothing changed. Fleets moved on. New wars demanded attention. The machinery of the Imperium continued to grind forward, fueled by faith, fear, and forgetting. The truth remained sealed, its existence denied by the very systems designed to protect humanity. Yet it endured, waiting in silence, patient as stone. If this truth is ever fully revealed, the Imperium will not survive it. The recording ended. The vault closed. And the galaxy went on, unaware that the greatest danger it faced was not an enemy in the dark, but a lie that could no longer hold forever.